Howdy. Thanks for being here. Last year, I spoke at B-Sides last year, and I got the luck of the draw, and I went first. I guess I failed this time, and I got last, so I'm glad somebody showed up. I do appreciate it. Who's hanging around for the after party? Okay, just curious. I figured that's the only reason you were here still. In any case, I like to start most of my presentations with a story, and to be honest, I was struggling to come up with a story that fit exactly the feel and emphasis that I wanted today, and so I was just going to skip it. I was going to skip the story, and then today happened. I get asked all the time, how do you like IR? And that's a trick question. I'm an incident response consultant, which means I have no life. That's just the way it works. It's the tyranny of the urgent on a continuum. So today, about halfway into the third session of this conference, I got a call. Most of my engagements start with a customer scoping call. Customers call, say something really bad happened, we need your help. I have a standard operating procedure. We're going to talk about that today. Before I engage with that customer on the scoping call, I go through some open source intelligence analysis. I want to know who I'm talking to before I talk to them, honestly. So I spend just a couple, 3 minutes preparing. Today I'm at a conference, so I don't have my laptop handy. So I break my own rule. I get on the call. Customer says, we just found out, it's a financial services firm. We just found out that someone broke into our network, broke into our financial services software and changed bank routing numbers for 20 plus of our customers and began to siphon all of their funds. Bummer. Not good. And so, in typical response, where do all the attacks come from anymore? They come from the internet, right? I mean, that's just the way it works. So I start to ask questions. I'm assuming that they got somehow attacked from the outside, and so I asked them, of course, what kind of remote access do you have to your environment? None. Okay. No client access VPN, no remote workers, nope, none. Everything's on-prem. Okay, so your financial services software is not available remotely from the internet in any way, shape, or form. Nope. Okay. I have no choice but to believe them in this moment, and then I'm thinking to myself, so if they literally have something, a system in their network that's compromised, this is hard, right? How am I going to find that? They've already done some initial analysis. They've failed or they wouldn't have called me. And so now I'm thinking about this process and how I'm going to ascertain amongst the servers and the workstations, how I'm going to help them decipher what happened. And I can't help myself. I'm like, and you're sure you have no remote access? None. Okay, well, I'm sorry, but this is going to be expensive. Digital forensics and incident response is expensive. I'm happy to help you. Here's the approach. We can take a metered approach, blah, blah, blah. I draft up a really quick email from my phone against my better judgment. And then I can't help myself. I bust out my laptop in the middle of B-Sides, and I do what I should have done initially, and I go to their corporate website. And if you ever work at a financial services firm, how did you get your information to them? Secure file transfer. And there's a link that says, here's how to transfer your files to us. So I click the link. And right next to the next page is employee login. I click that link, and up pops their financial services login page from the interwebs while I'm at the conference. This is exactly what I want to talk to you about today. It was the perfect prelude. See, the universe provides. Welcome to Open Source Intelligence for Incident Investigation, Incident Response. Today is not about the world's deepest dive into open source intelligence. Open source intelligence is a topic all unto itself. Usually we talk about it in the context of offensive security. Pen test, red team. Usually it's an exploitation of publicly available data to somehow attack you, take advantage of you. I'm going to flip the script a little bit because that's not what I do. I do incident response. And so I want to talk about, less so about open source intelligence, deep dive, nuanced, lengthy exposés. I want to talk about OSINT for IR from a due diligence perspective. And I'm not trying to I'm talking to the IT manager in my scenario a minute ago. I'm not trying to pick on that person. This happens all the time. Who here has web authentication portals that you don't know about? I mean, that's just real life. In this case, though, he should have come to this talk because just a little bit of effort, a little bit of due diligence can pay huge dividends in leveraging open source intelligence for incident investigation. So here we are. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go at a high rate of speed. And at the very end, I'm going to share, I have these slides available to you on tinyurl.com/OSINT for IR. I will share that with you at the very end so you can take a picture of that. You don't have to take a picture of the rest of the deck if you don't want to. The deck is available to you. I've also written a bunch of this up in step-by-step on 2 Black Hills Information Security blog posts. Not entirely, but a lot of the specific technical components are already written up for you. So relax, just listen, laugh if you think I'm trying to be funny. And I will share those links at the end. So brief introduction. We'll talk about the context because context is king, much like I just talked about. OSINT means all sorts of things to all sorts of different folk. Today I get to define what it means, so thank you. Then I'm going to talk about my 3-minute intro, OSINT for IR. That's the thing I wish I had done before I got on the phone with that last customer. Then I'm going to talk about a couple case studies where I've actually used some open source technology, open source intelligence to solve a couple 3 cases. And hopefully that's beneficial to you, whether you're a consultant, an internal representative, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, at the very end, I will share my contact information and, again, the links to the slides and a general link to the blog post. Hi. My name is Patterson Cake, not a pseudonym. I am a digital forensics incident response consultant for Black Hills Information Security, little DF, big IR, because mostly what I do is incident response. Mostly what I do is help people, like in the scenario that I mentioned a minute ago. And I've come to be an Occam fan late in life, but I've discovered that in the middle of incident response, things get complicated all by themselves. And so my mantra, I am constantly trying to keep things simple, effective and repetitive. Simple, effective, and repeatable. That's the only way I survive in managing the crisis of active incident response. And so simplicity is my goal in almost everything. I'm sure you've heard the quote that complexity is the enemy of security. It's just a fact. It's a fact. So if we get all done with this and you're like, well, that wasn't that complicated, then mission accomplished. That's exactly what I'm trying to do here, not show you whiz-bang complicated components. When I get a call like I did today, they want actionable intelligence. That customer wanted to know, what do I do now? They don't want me to give them strategy, philosophy, that's hard to say. They don't want nuance, they want results, and they want them ASAP because I'm expensive. Okay. This is huge. This is the presupposition, so hang with me for just a minute. Incident response is about unanswered questions. Today, again, perfect example. Thank you very much. The real questions that they want answered are, how did this happen? How did this happen? Because they want twofold. They want to make sure it never happens again, and they can't help themselves. They're dying to know how this played out, who's responsible, what the threat vector was, etc. Ultimately, they have questions, and they need help answering them. From my perspective, it's critically important that you are asking the right questions. That sounds simple, but that's part of what this slide is about, and I'll spare you the diatribe. You can read it yourself, but this is important. You need to define what it is you're trying to ascertain before you dive into the muck and the mire. Who's a nerd here? Yeah, I know, all of you. We love the minutia. We love the rabbit trails. It's really hard as a digital forensics and incident consultant not to be all excited about things that the customer doesn't care about. It's harder to get paid. So, asking the right questions, critical to finding the right answers. What do I mean by open source intelligence? What I mean is, what does the internet know about you? What does it know about your business? That's it. That's really all I care about. I'm not talking about deep web, dark web, whatever other web. I'm talking surface web, easily accessible, information effectively that is public knowledge, whether you know it or like it or not. A couple things that are fun about this. Some important nuances. This is largely zero touch. I am not interacting with the customer environment. Especially at the outset of an engagement, I don't have permission to do that yet. And secondarily, I'm not getting paid. I'm not doing deep dive analysis. I'm just going to do initial foray. And until I have permission, today, publicly accessible link to their financial services portal, I clicked it. I did not try and log in. Again, there's a line there. You define it for yourself. Mostly zero touch, maybe light touch, maybe normal touch, if you will, from a publicly available, accessible perspective. The next part is, what does the internet know about you now? What about now? What about now? This is constantly changing, ever evolving, and this is the challenge, and this is part of the value in the proposition that we're about to explore is, I'm talking about right now. I'm not talking about yesterday, 2 weeks ago, 30 days ago. We might get to that point, but right now I am focused, laser focused on why we're having this conversation. Again, from a customer, an investigative perspective, an incident response perspective. What does the internet know about you? Excuse me. I'm going to broadly lump OSINT into two categories. And this is really not important, but it maps with some of my workflow process. And that is that we have intentional exposure. These are things that you meant to be public. Lots of things that you're mostly familiar with because you're technical folk that I'm not sure. Again, no criticism of the IT manager today that I spoke to, but I don't think it was a highly technical role. It was more a managerial role. And so there are things that fall into this category that he was, I think, unfortunately unaware of. But we'll explore some of these things. Things like DNS. DNS is important. You make it public on purpose so people can find your website. MX records. You want people to get your email or you want to receive email. It's important that those things are public. Social media, job postings, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I'm not going deep dive, but this is just categorically things that we mean to expose. I guess I lied. I sort of bifurcated the second into unintentional and or unauthorized. And there's once again a fine line there. This is sort of a gray area, and this is sort of the second part of our foray into OSINT for IR as we progress through this conversation. These are things that they may have been intentional at one point, and or they were published intentionally by someone who didn't understand what they were doing. Some of my favorite OSINT resources are labeled test dev. They're things that people stood up. I'm just going to test this real quick, like, excuse me, what? All the time. So again, not really important, but this does extend beyond the things that we would know and expect to be public, like standard DNS-A records, a mapping to a website name, MX records, etc. So we'll talk a little bit about this. This gets more nuanced all the time, and especially depending on the business. I'll stop there because I said I wasn't going to go deep dive. I have to control myself. I have to be a good example for you all. So, OSINT for IR, when and where. This, again, when, where, and why. This is important. Now, my situation is probably a little different than yours. Any IR consultants in the room? Why are you even here? A little different for you. Honestly, in some ways, easier for you because your due diligence can be repetitive. My due diligence is crisis-driven. It's crud. I got to step out of session number 3 to go do some OSINT for IR. But there's a lot of overlap and a lot of parallels, I hope, for you. And really, this is what I'm after. Situational awareness number 1. When I go on a scoping call and or if you're responsible for an environment, this is stuff that you should know. You should know if you have an authentication portal published on the internet to access your most business-critical resource. You think? Again, yes, I am being critical of the IT manager. There's no way around it. Perimeter check. This is the OSINT for IR. What does the internet know right now? What does it know right now? What does it know right now? You have to define that cadence. That's up to you. For me, again, usually it's point in time at the outset. For you, it may be weekly. It may be monthly. Again, it depends on who you are, depends on your business model. The third is the neighborhood watch. The internet is a big place. And at some point, it behooves you to not just do a perimeter check, but to look around at your broader surroundings. to take a survey of the larger landscape, and we'll see, again, reap some dividends from that a little bit later on. My presupposition for this entire conversation is, if the internet knows, the threat actors know, and I need to know. That is my due diligence as a responsible consultant. And I think if you're in an information security role for your company, you should feel similarly. Somebody in your environment should be paying attention to this stuff. You with me? Y'all look so serious. All right. So what follows is my pre-scoping call 3-minute OSINT for IR. 3 minutes is a long time, truthfully. I can get a lot done in very little time, and I'm just setting the stage. This is situational awareness for me. I don't have permission to interact with customer environment. I'm not getting paid. I just want to know who I'm talking to. And to be blunt, I look smart when I get on the call. I'm like, so I see you're using M365 for email. I'm like, whoa, he's a wizard. I see you have online access to your financial software. I blew it. Anyway, I'll be critical of me in that particular instance. So 3-minute drill. And literally, I often only have a couple 3 minutes. Sometimes I'm doing this while the customer's talking. They're telling me a story. I'm like, yes, I'm NS lookup. Hold on. Yes, go, I'm listening. Corporate website. I use this cool thing called a browser. Fortunately, in our modern day and age, most of my scoping calls come in via email. Email alert often, and or at least at the outset, I have an email address. Think of all the cool things you learn from an email address. Top-level domain, possibly username format. Those are places for me to start. Again, who am I talking to, who I'm about to talk to. DNS is a goldmine. We'll see that in just a minute. And then I'll probably spend a little bit of time on evil search engines, which I'll show you momentarily. Situational awareness, bit of a perimeter check. I probably don't have time to get into neighborhood watch, particularly at the outset or prior to scoping call, but I may try. Corporate website is obvious, but it gives me a flavor. Who is it? What kind of business? How big a business? Might they be targeted? Might they actually be targeted by APTs? All sorts of fascinating things. I don't really do much. I just click around. Who is it? Do they have any money? Can they afford our services? No, I don't think that way. DNS, as mentioned, we'll take a look at some of this. Mail exchanger. Business email compromise is the new ransomware. I made that up. You're welcome. I swear, business email. I'm so tired of doing business email compromise cases. It's just exhausting over and over and over. And 98% of the universe uses M365. And literally, I want to know that before I get on the call. Who's your mail provider? Google, somebody else, heaven forbid, on-prem exchange. I definitely want to know that. All available to me, super quick and easy. As we'll see with DNS, I can learn all sorts of other things. Who use cloud service providers? Who has cloud infrastructure? AWS, Azure, GCP? No. Everybody, right? I can answer that without ever talking to you, often. At least get a feel, get a flavor. ISP, internet ranges, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Evil search engine, which we'll talk about in a minute. Like I said, I don't often have time for this, but I can do a quick search and just look for glaring. Seriously, things like if the latest and greatest 0-day came out yesterday, Exchange version whatever, or a new Log4j, or a Palo Alto, or a, heaven forbid, might give me some real quick insight before I jump on a call. So let's step through those momentarily. Corporate website, you're on your own. You have a browser, you can figure that one out. I believe in you. DNS, lots of different ways to do this. I'm old, so I like NS lookup. It makes me feel cool to use a command line. You don't have to do that. The other thing that's cool about NS lookup is it is fairly ubiquitous. It's on all operating systems for the most part, and the command syntax is the same, which also makes me look good and feel smart about myself. I can transition from Linux to Windows to WSL to Mac, whatever, and use the same syntax, and makes me happy inside. If you're not happy with that, totally fine. I also really like DNS Dumpster. This is not an exhaustive list. These are the ones I like. If you have another tool, use that one. As per the bottom of the slide, which you may or may not be able to see, remember I'm usually starting this conversation with a couple pieces of information, top-level domain name, potential username format. I'm going to use that to feed into these tools. NS lookup, Super simple, super easy. Pull up a command prompt, type in NS lookup. Mash the enter key. You're now at an interactive prompt. And if you want, this is usually where I start. I want MX records. I want to know who your mail provider is. I don't care who hosts your website. Who hosts their own website anymore? Don't raise your hand. Seriously, this is the attack vector of choice. So I want to know this. So set type equals MX, mash enter key. Type in top-level domain name, mash enter key, and 9 times out of 10, I will see some derivative of protection.outlook.com. They're on M365. Done. Occasionally, it's PP hosted. If you see PP hosted, that's probably also M365. And then you might see other things, but almost always, it's that. And point in fact, does this work? Speaking of point, this is an important URL that you should be aware of. This should be part of your internal situational awareness, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, talk to me later. NS lookup. Now, if you don't want to do that, you don't have to do that. DNS dumpster is also your friend. That same information's in dnsdumpster.com, the MX record information. I've pulled a snippet because I'm picking on automobile manufacturers today. This is Dodge and Ford. Visit dnsdumpster.com, type in a TLD, top-level domain name, dodge.com, Ford.com, whatever, mash the enter key, and that quick, I now know that Dodge uses Salesforce, has resources in AWS, has some GCP, uses M365 for their mail. I know something about their the geographical locations. I know that's Ford over there, but same thing. I just use snippets from each. I know about their IP address ranges. I know who their internet service providers are. Often I know their ASN. I've just learned a tremendous about, talking is very difficult, a tremendous amount about their internet footprint with 20 seconds, maybe? Hugely advantageous. Ton of information, which we'll build on shortly. Evil search engine, it used to be that you could choose from anyone you wanted as long as it was Shodan. And now we have lots of choices. There's lots and lots and lots of choices. I don't care which one you use, although I would strongly suggest that you have more than one. It is always surprising to me, I don't know why, I'm a slow learner, I guess, how the difference in results I get between pivoting from multiple of these providers. So I think you ought to have at least a couple, 3. Be careful of these. You can find not for safe work things on these sites. You can get misinformation on these sites. I started to say trust but verify, but I guess I would say don't trust and verify. So take it with a grain of salt. It's just a quick snapshot, some initial foray into our 3-minute drill. We'll circle back and talk a little bit more about this, but choose 1, choose 2. And then again, you just visit these. In many instances, you'll need to register. In some instances, you need to pay. But armed with the information that we just gathered from DNS Dumpster, we're poised to move to Shodan, Leak, Census, or some other flavor of your own choosing, and drop in, again, in this case, I'll just drop in a top-level domain, toyota.com. And instantly, I get a pretty interesting picture of Toyota's internet footprint, what's publicly accessible. That's what we're after, right? Situational awareness, perimeter check, neighborhood watch. Now, I've drilled in just a little bit here for some facet analysis because a bunch of IP addresses are not super exciting to me. I can see IP addresses associated with region. Remember, we looked at DNS Dumpster. Dodge did not look to have anything in Africa. If I pivot to Shodan and I see a bunch of Africa IP addresses, I go, huh. Ironically, they have a bunch of stuff in the Netherlands, which should be a suspicious indicator. Maybe I'll call them. The next thing is ports. And if this doesn't mean anything to you, don't worry about it. You don't need to fret over it. But if it does, if you're familiar with TCP ports, you immediately look at a couple things on there and go, oops, that doesn't look good. Once again, in all seriousness, I've invested a couple minutes time in examining Toyota, for example. I know who their mail provider is. I know who their cloud infrastructure providers are. I know their geographical regions, and I know that they have systems with RDP accessible to the internet, remote desktop protocol. Looks like maybe they host their own email servers. Again, just a couple really quick. I'll probably stop there, okay? Because again, I don't have permission to enumerate. This is publicly accessible. I didn't touch anything. I like Shodan, but Shodan is proud of themselves now. Used to be you could get very inexpensive subscriptions every so often. Their annual sale, Black Friday kind of thing. And now it's like $50 a month, which is kind of steep. I paid for it when it was cheap. Oh, it's $69 a month. Ouch. That's a lot of money. If you do this all the time, you do it for a living, they have other features and services. It's pretty powerful, but that's expensive. Leakix, for example, you can pay for Leakix. I think the base is $26, $27 a month. But if you register with Leakix, you get pretty full featured access. I do not pay for this. And this is newish, so I'm a little more skeptical of this as a platform. But still, I do the same things, and often I get pretty similar results with some slight nuance and variation. It does me good, honestly, to do both real quick. Just compare and contrast, might see something interesting. Here we're specifically calling out Toyota.com plus port 3389 because I want to replicate what I just saw on Shodan. For those of you who are unfamiliar, that is a potential way to remotely access a Windows system, which should generally not be accessible over the interwebs. Not a good sign. And I'm done. 3 minutes. 3 minutes is generous. I have all those bookmarked, as you might imagine, and takes me a couple, three. Probably can do it in a minute and a half if you want to hurry. It's hard to stop. I do it intentionally. I'm like, okay, stop. Because I'm, 3389. I gotta go check that out. Control yourself. And now I transition to what do I now know about you? And for me, at least, whether it's your business or whether it's a customer engagement, now you feel informed. I know a lot more than I did a couple minutes ago, and I would have been instantly in a better position to help the customer in my introductory statements. That's it. I'm prepared for that conversation. You're prepared potentially for a conversation. This is the kind of thing you probably want to pay attention to if you're responsible for an environment. Pay attention and then diff it on a regular basis. If you didn't see 3389 yesterday and you do today, call somebody. Call the security team, whoever's responsible for the fire, whatever. That is super powerful in terms of regular maintenance, regular observation, and then what changed, which is a beautiful segue into my next slide. That is often one of the most important questions in incident response. What changed? Something changed. Almost invariably, when something really bad happens in your environment, it's because something changed. Misconfiguration, 0-day, etc. If you had weak passwords and 3389 open to the internet for the last 3 months, you'd have called me sooner. That's the way it works. It's the way it works. So something happened probably recently that led us to this point in time in this conversation. So this is where I begin to move into the next portion of the conversation. Once I get permission, and once I'm going to get reimbursed for some of my time and energy, I will likely go into some additional attack surface management. It's all the things that we just did. It's all poised. Write this stuff down. Everything I just did in your 3-minute exercise, write it down. Screen cap it. You will never be sad that you took a screenshot of what you saw on Shodan. You never look at it again? Bummer. Who cares? Whatever. You have to come back later, and I've done this before. I've learned the hard way. 3389 was open yesterday. I literally had a demo from a company named Armstrong something or something that I was going to show you today, and I went yesterday to double check it, and it's gone now. Dang it. I didn't screenshot it. I was going to do it live. Like, you're going to be so impressed with me. I'm glad I checked because you'd been like, what? There's nothing there. So screenshot it. Date and time stamp it, and you'll be glad that you did. And then you're poised for this next step should you need to go further, should you need to go deeper. Remember that on our previous foray, I'm already armed with this information. I have your IP ranges. I paid attention to DNS Dumpster, and you use contiguous IP space of 72.13.69.1 through 40. Super useful information. I know about your domains. I know about your dev test VPN, remote, all those cool things you publish on the internet. And then we're going to go to the next step. I got a call from a customer just a few months ago, and they were extremely concerned because they were experiencing what they believed to be an internal denial of service attack on their corporate LAN. Somebody was beating the crap out of Active Directory and false missed password alignment and guessing passwords and locking out accounts, and they're freaking out. because this is bad, right? There's somebody in their corporate environment trying to guess passwords, locking out the CEO's account, etc. They're panicking. They call us and say, we need help. This is a large enterprise. Once again, I'm thinking, oh, they can't figure it out. They can't determine the host name association with the authentication request, but don't worry, I'll do it. So I'm like, okay, all right, we can do this. It's going to be expensive. Can I start with just a couple hours of attack surface management? Just give me a couple hours. Can I have authorization to enumerate your environment? Can I have authorization to do some OSINT? Let me get back to you. Within, I don't know, an hour or so through the attack surface management process, I took everything I learned in my 3-minute drill and I pivoted to a couple additional things, specifically IP address ranges and then keyword searches. And we'll see an example of this in just a minute. Keyword searches led me to find a machine on the internet with no other specific relation to their environment, but it was tied to their internal domain, so it was mycompany.local instead of mycompany.com. Shodan, port 3389, and a very, very nice accounting lady had been given permission to work from home. She took her laptop home. She didn't know about this Wi-Fi thing, so she plugged a network cable from her laptop into her cable modem. No firewall at all. She's like, what? That's a firewall. No, it isn't. So her Windows system, split VPN, split tunnel VPN. So every time she attached to the VPN, the internet's like, aha, 3389, 445, all the ports that you would expect open on Windows. The internet is beating the tar out of that thing trying to log in. When she's attached to the VPN, all the auth is sent over the VPN tunnel to the Active Directory domain controller. And quite literally, there's no genius involved in that. I'm not like, oh man, I'm so dang smart. But I went from solving their case in an hour to potentially a 40, 60, 80-hour engagement in trying to enumerate the entirety of the internal environment to find patient 0. Due diligence. So the next step in this process for me often is switching from domain to IP address ranges. That's the next step. And this is an example, just a singular example of, this is a healthcare environment. I was going to do this for Armstrong, but apparently they found me out. This is a snippet. On the left is me feeding top-level domain, company.com to Shodan. And on the right, I'm feeding it just company, not the URL. Let's say, again, my company ABC versus mycompanyabc.com, and you can see the result difference. This is a real example for a real domain that I'm familiar with. It's a healthcare services provider, and with the TLD, I get 3 results. Looks pretty clean, looks pretty clear. Pivot to keyword search effectively, which is just the name of their business, and the world is opened up. And this is opened up. They have SSH, another potential remote access solution accessible to some of their IP ranges. Not rocket surgery, as you might imagine. Yes, I said that on purpose. This is the exact same process. I think I have it bigger. Oh, my goodness. Wow, blind myself. This is the exact same process, again, through Census and/or Leakix. They all have slightly different syntax. I'm sorry, it's not my fault. You'll get used to it. Copy and paste so that you remember how to put in an IP range. Usually it's a CIDR range, but again, you'll figure it out. We learned the IP addresses from DNS Dumpster. I'm using private ranges here on purpose, obviously. You're not going to find, well, you shouldn't find 10.10 on the internet, but you get the idea. This is again, the next step in my process. That's easy. That's often quite illuminating, to be frank. The next step in the process takes a little more time, effort, and energy. Takes a little creativity on your part, and it's actually fun. This part I really like, because the first part's just pretty straight up, pretty simple. Contacted by a financial services firm, not the same financial services firm that I spoke of earlier. Financial services firm calls and says, we have seen a 400% increase in fraudulent home equity line of credit transactions in the last 90 days, and we have no idea why. And this is a mature environment, not like my previous scenario. They are segmented. They have all the latest and greatest. They have dedicated security teams. They have separation of duties. They're doing it right. And I'm talking to them like, wow, I'm impressed. And they've done everything they can do to figure it out. Internal threat, what is happening? Some crazy zero-day malware that somehow is bridging our internal air gap systems. And I'm like, to be frank, I want this case a lot. Like, I'd almost do it for free because it's like fascinating. And it's going to be expensive. You notice the theme. But once again, I say, time out. Forgive me, can I have a couple hours? Will you give me a couple hours authorization and let me do some attack surface enumeration and let me see what I can find. And this one took some time. So in this scenario, I'm using fictitious financial services institution bank. That's a fair approximation of the title of the actual company, and I'm just not very creative, so you get the idea. But it's like that, and frankly, their TLD is something like ffsi.org. It's kind of unique. It's a character string that you wouldn't encounter a lot. It's not like mycompany.com, for example. So for me, in the next phases, this is where I get to put on my thinking cap, if you will, and I am looking for the lowest level of granular uniqueness that I can come up with. I can't very well search for bank. I found something. I need something that is unique to the organization, but I need it to be vague enough that it doesn't just come up under their top-level domain name. And then I'm going to pull on all the previous strings and correlate what I already know is legitimate, public, intentional. And this is if there was a secret sauce, it's not very secret, but this is the secret sauce for the next portion. And this is where I got to get creative. I have to start thinking, okay, if it was fsi.com or ffsibank.org or whatever, I need permutations. I need to start thinking about granular uniqueness, and I'm going to feed these phrases into the aforementioned search engines, Census, Shodan, Leakix, and see what I can see. This is fun. How do you spell bank? Who cares? Is it close enough someone would click on it? I didn't make that one up, by the way. I'm not that smart. But that was actually a legitimate doppelganger domain that was used in the rest of this story. So I pivot to Leakix in this example. I'm putting in FFSI. That's really hard to say. I should have come up with something easier to say in a presentation. In any case, and remember all that I know about them based on my initial foray. I know who their mail provider is. I know their geographic reasons. This particular financial services institution is in the west coast of the United States exclusively, not Japan, not on DigitalOcean, not on a random mail server. Okay, remember, don't trust, but verify. Like, okay, could this be something? If you look at the minutia down here, you can see ffsibank.com or bank. There's a little bit additional that I've obfuscated, obviously, and this is starting to look legit. That's a bizarre character string. I have yet to see it used outside of relationship to the bank. And to cut a long story short, as it turns out, yes, I visited that IP address, okay? I browsed there. That's what I do. I browsed to that IP address, and it turns out it's a Cambodian gambling site. I apologize for the quality of that image. That is the actual image of the Cambodian gambling site, which no longer exists. So I go to ffsibank.com, and I land on a Cambodian gambling site. And I'm smart this way. I'm like, I don't think that's right. So I dig a little deeper, and on the right-hand side, you'll see I'm now enumerating the mail server, which we looked at in the previous slide. And that blacked out entry, this is the actual entry, so I've obfuscated that, was ffsibank.html file. Of course, I clicked on that carefully. And then I rendered a very, very nice recreation of the financial services login page. And again, moderately long story, slightly shorter, through this process enumerated 3, 4, 5, 6 of these sites spread all around the globe, actively targeting this financial services organization, stealing their users' creds. The user would log in, they would fail login, be redirected to the actual authentication page for the bank. The threat actors now have the credentials, and they were able to log into the users' banking portals. And for whatever reason, they were targeting home equity line of credit loans and trying to write and create financial transactions. Small plug for browserling.com. If you've never used Browserling, you should check it out. It's a virtualized web interface. It's designed for web developers to test different browsers, but I use it for enumerating things that I'm scared of, because it's completely isolated in their virtual infrastructure. So I can browse someplace, download malware. I have no direct interaction between that browser session and my PC. It's pretty cool. It's worth the money. You can try it for free, and actually the free version works pretty good. It's just time limited. But huge shout out to them, because that's how I enumerated all these things safely without having to be scared to impact my environment. And I got to hurry now. Told you I was going to cram a lot in here. So I'm not done yet, though. In this particular analysis, I have some clues, and this is important. The threat actors have TTPs, right? What that means is they're lazy and they do it the same way over and over again. So if you can discern any pattern of their behavior, you should then take that pattern and cast a wider net. Now we're going to the neighborhood watch. I see some things there. This is awesome, by the way. They cataloged all of the visits. I know all the IP addresses that visited this site, which I really appreciate. So I was actually able to take that and provide it to the bank and say, if you have a way to correlate, which may be challenging, here's everybody who went to this site and probably gave up their credentials. I take that information and I dig a little deeper. Here I am on Census, search.census.io, and I feed it the same unique granular search phrase, and I determine a pattern initially, and that is they use Let's Encrypt. Anybody know about Let's Encrypt? Thank you so much. They're free encryption certificates, which changed the whole world of threat actors as we know it, because now they encrypt everything because it's free. That doesn't mean they're illegitimate, but again, I find some patterns, I feed those patterns into Census, and long story short, once again, you can see these are legitimate for this bank. They actually use GoDaddy and Sectigo and Google. They don't use Let's Encrypt. So I take that component in conjunction with key phraseology, and that's how I found the next 3 or 4 portals scattered all over the country based on the combination of key phraseology and the type of encryption certificate. I'm almost done. The upper left-hand one is an actual financial services company that I found by accident while making this presentation. I legitimately had to reach out to this company and say, did you know that you have people with forged login pages for your bank? I was building the slides, obfuscating them, making them up, and in the process of doing that, found that this entirely unrelated financial services company was being targeted by the same threat actors and the Australian government, which is the right-hand side of this slide. Fortunately, they already knew about that. Somebody else found about that a couple days before I did, so I didn't have to call the Australian government. This is all, and this is important, this is all based on that threat actor standard operating procedures. They reuse the same tactics, and it's incredibly valuable to extract that information and then use it for your ongoing investigation and analysis. I am not suggesting to you that this is the key to unlock every incident investigation that you will ever encounter. I've worked somewhere around 50, 60 significant incidents in the last 3 years, and I think I've pretty close to solved 4 or 5 cases through this type of process. That's not a bad track record considering I'm investing often less than a couple hours' time. That's why I revert back to the due diligence component. I would feel really bad if I had done a deep dive and spent 40 hours of that customer's time at a significant billable rate to go, I couldn't really find anything without having done all of this. So for me now, it's just part of the process. The 3-minute introduction, I want to know who it is I'm talking to, and then if I move on beyond that into the nuanced attack surface analysis, pays dividends. Stuff you should know, current state, high return on investment for your due diligence process. Whew. I think I'm done. Slides, tinyurl.com/OSINT for IR. My contact information, let's be friends. I don't know if you know anything about Black Hills, but one of our mantras is reinvesting in the cybersecurity community. We constantly give away free training. We constantly give away free resources. That's what we do. So if you have questions, you want to talk more about this, I am seriously interested in talking with you. Send me an email. I have a GitHub repo with some additional components. Check out the blog because I've actually written up the first 2 use cases in step-by-step detail.
Okay, thanks, Patterson. That was great. So you were talking about taking diffs of the results of those 3-minute drills. How do you record the information so that you can take the diff, and like what kind of time span does that diff exist over?
Do you make up these questions? Because if you do,
I pay attention.
You make up really good questions.
Yeah.
So fantastic question. Yeah. So first and foremost, like I mentioned, screenshots for the win. One thing I forgot to mention is that most of them, Shodan in particular, but almost all of them will give you date and timestamp of the most recent occurrence. So it will actually show you 3389 was open on that IP last seen yesterday at 3:22 a.m. That's huge, hugely important. You will want to go back to that at some point, I promise you, especially after you explain it to the customer. So screenshots number 1, and then almost all of those portals will give you an export in CSV or XLS, Excel spreadsheet. You probably have to register in order to do that, but usually registration is free. And so exporting that information is a great way to compare and contrast and or save for your records. That's a great question, and I actually meant to mention that, so thank you. Well done. We didn't even stage that.
So if anybody else has any questions, come up to the front and ask them into the microphone. That way we can get it on the recording. Does anybody in ASIG have any questions? No? Okay. Yes, Wesley. Haha. Wesley, thank you very much. Come on up.
That was awesome. Thank you. Ironically, I actually did a lot of the DNS stuff like you were talking about, and I don't know if this is something you've already done or not, but 2 sites I really liked were DNS Trails and viewdns.info, particularly on DNS Trails when you're talking about the test DNS records and stuff. They have a lot of historical data, which has been really nice for pulling that out and such. But in my previous life, I was actually a consultant as well, and your call today of like, oh, hey, here's your custom auth provider. The additional like 90 seconds that I've found from doing it is, I don't understand why the companies do, but I've seen so many from the consultancy role. They just come in, it's like, oh yes, we're just gonna write our own auth provider, and every single time it's just absolute hot garbage. And every single time that is their IOC. So,
Totally.
Just more of a story. More
Totally
of a
agreed.
question.
Yeah. The moral of the story is don't roll your own auth or your own crypto ever. You're welcome.
Any more questions? Yeah.
Wonderful presentation. I know that 3389 jumps out immediately. How often do you see port 22 being leveraged in attacks successfully?
Great question. So port 22 leveraging attacks, for those of you who aren't aware, port 22 is default for SSH, for secure shell access. For better or for worse, for most cloud providers, you spin up an instance, and if it's a Linux Unix box, for example, port 22 is going to be open to the internet by default, which is not great. So I don't see a lot of abuse. I don't see a lot of successful abuse. I see constant attempts at abuse. Most of the world has gotten to the point where they're no longer using just straight up password auth for SSH, so at least they're using certificate auth, and if they're not, then they're hosed. I worked a case week before last where they thought they had certificate auth enabled and it was password auth, and it took 24 hours or so for the internet to see it, beat the snot out of it, log into the accounts, assign secure passwords, which is fascinating, assign certificate auth. They secured the box for the people so nobody else could get in, but great question. That is a common problem, and definitely something you want to be on the lookout for in your environment. Port 22, port 3389, and for the love of all things holy, if you see port 445 publicly accessible, call InfoSec right now. Great question. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, let's thank Patterson once again. That was fantastic.